Hear the word of the Lord as it was to Habakkuk, his prophet. O Lord, I have heard the report of you and your work. O Lord, do I fear. In the midst of the years, revive it. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. Rays flashed from his hands, and there he veiled his power. Before him went pestilence, and plague followed at his heels. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and shook the nations. Then the eternal mountains were scattered. The everlasting hills sank low. His were the everlasting ways. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Was your anger against the rivers, or your indignation against the sea, when you rode on your horses, on your chariot of salvation? You stripped the sheath from your bow, calling for many arrows. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. The raging waters swept on. The deep gave forth its voice. It lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their place at the light of your arrows as they sped, at the flash of your glittering spear. You marched through the earth in fury. You threshed the nations in anger. You went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. You pierced with his own arrows the heads of his warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter me, rejoicing as if to devour the poor in secret. You trampled the sea with horses, the surging of mighty waters. I hear, and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. Yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon those who invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food. The flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. And God bless the reading of His Word. You may be seated. Now, when I first heard that we were going to be preaching through the hymns or canticles of the Bible outside the Psalms this semester, I was grateful for Dr. Ship for organizing that. Thought it was a great idea. I planned on preaching Habakkuk 3 as a weapon against insipid hymnody, but I have it on good authority that we've lost that battle. So, moving on from that, Habakkuk also explicitly explains at the end of the passage that it is to be accompanied with stringed instruments, so it has no application for us anyway. All right, I got all my jokes out of the way up front, so we're done.
Amen.
Amen. And then we're good. If you've ever seen the musical Les Mis, you've heard the iconic song, Bring Him Home. It's an interesting song in a whole lot of ways. It's incredibly high throughout the song. And I've really only ever heard one guy that really gets it right, and that's the first guy, Colm Wilkinson, the first Valjean. But more interesting than the music, the song functions, as so many of Valjean's songs do in the musical, and it's really in keeping with his character in the book. It functions as a confession of faith. It begins with, God on high, hear my prayer. In my need, you have always been there. Now, pause with me and consider for a moment. Do you remember where Valjean is when he sings this song? He's at the barricade. He's trying to find a way to rescue the young man that his adopted daughter, whose mother died as a prostitute, has fallen in love with. This, after having been imprisoned, then fled, then caught again, then been shown grace by a priest, then lived as a mayor, then forced by a constable to go back on the run. See, if I were singing Valjean's song, I would say, God on high, hear my prayer. In my need, now and then you've been there. But Valjean is looking to the future with hindsight. And this is a theme, I think, that speaks across human experience. Yes, as Dr. Peterson said at our roundtable last week, by the standards of anywhere and any time in the world, we are exceedingly blessed. We're wealthy beyond imagining in the ancient world, and we really have it pretty easy, especially compared to our brethren in places like Syria and China and Sudan. But the truth is, we will all experience desolation of a kind. Grief, abandonment, loneliness, loss. These are universal to the human experience, and no amount of wealth, no level of comfort can isolate us from them. So texts like the Psalms of Lament, or say the desperate cry of Job, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I think this text here in Habakkuk 3 remain not so much relevant to us as endemic to us as human beings of faith. See, these are the cry of hope in the midst of despair. Habakkuk preaches somewhere between 610 and 600 BC, which was a great time in Judah. Not really. Somewhere just short of the Babylonian exile. They're tense times. Habakkuk had no doubt seen the death of Josiah. And you'll remember from your study of the Old Testament that Josiah had instituted major reforms in Judah. He had brought back the worship of Yahweh, torn down the shrines and the high places. It was a glorious time. But immediately after his death, in about 609, those reforms are proven to be barely skin deep. Nothing has changed in the heart of the people of Judah. They're just as heathen as they've always been. And the moment the threat of Josiah is gone, they return to their idolatrous, wicked ways. So it's in this environment that Habakkuk receives his word from the Lord. The book really is kind of tragic comedy. It begins with Habakkuk crying out to the Lord because of the wickedness of the people of Judah. How long, Lord, are you going to put up with this oppression of the poor and all the wickedness and evil and idolatrous ways of your people? Habakkuk cries out for justice. And, as is so often the case, Habakkuk learns to be careful what he wishes for. The Lord tells him, "Oh, don't you worry, Habakkuk. I've got plans for this wicked people. I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans." I love this quote, "That bitter and hasty nation, the Chaldeans." So the phone goes silent for a minute. There's a long pause, a bit of an intake of breath. And then from Hosea's side, there comes the response. Wait, what? The Chaldeans? Thus begins Habakkuk's second complaint in chapter 1. "Lord, they're worse than we are. The cure is worse than the disease." And the Lord responds with comfort for Habakkuk. "Oh, don't worry, they'll get theirs as well." More than that, though, through this, the world will come to see the futility of idols made with hands. And at the end of chapter 2, come to know that the Lord is in his holy temple, and they will be commanded to keep holy, reverent silence before him. So we come to chapter 3. Then our passage, Habakkuk begins with a recounting of God's mighty deeds in history. "I have heard reports about you," he says. "I didn't witness them myself. I wasn't there for these mighty acts, but they were passed down to me." So in the midst of the years, Habakkuk says, revive it. Bring these mighty acts into history once again. Reveal the power of your arm. Habakkuk recalls the deliverance of God when he delivered Israel all those times in the past and brought his judgment on the nations that assailed her. But Habakkuk remembers those acts, and it's really interesting when you get to that point, as if they're happening in the future. He envisions himself on the other side of the struggle he's currently in after God has acted in the same way that he's always acted in deliverance of his people. I think it's important to see that. There's something of a blending here, of a conflation of God's past acts with his coming deliverance. There's a recognition of God's faithfulness, of his coming salvation in the future that is imminent, and it's like Habakkuk is viewing it from the other side. But at present, Habakkuk just hasn't experienced it yet. He says, I hear and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones and my legs tremble beneath me. So at this moment, Habakkuk is in the midst of the storm, torn by grief, broken by his present. He's like Job sitting on the garbage heap. But he knows what the Lord is capable of, because he's received the stories of God's deliverance. And so, despite all of the pain in the present, Habakkuk confesses, yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come on the people who invade us. We will all, every one of us, walk through the valley of the shadow in some way. There's no doubt about it. There's no escaping it. And all the pie in the sky, blue skies and rainbows, baloney in the world won't speak to us at that moment. As we open the Word to our people every week, remember that. In season, out of season. In times of joy and in times of grief, we must recount time and time again what God has done. How God has acted in the past. Because only someone who remembers the God who raises the dead can cry out in the midst of desolation, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor there be fruit on the vines. The produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food. The flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Despite all of that, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. Only someone who remembers the gospel of Jesus Christ, the mightiest act of the God of Israel, can cry out, as did Job, blessed be the name of the Lord. May it be so in our own lives as well. May we remember the past as we move towards the future.